Hi, everybody. How are you? It's Sunday in Algarve, Portugal. It's a beautiful day, as always. It's a little warmer than I personally prefer, but great beach weather. And as I've said earlier, Algarve is really all about the beaches. In fact, beach after beach after beach after beach. So today I'd like to talk about my accidental career. I mentioned to you earlier that I had a career in the non-government sector or the nonprofit sector for 4 decades, and it was amazing in many ways. The reason I want to share this is because there are little clues about the fact that ultimately someday, one day, I might end up here in Portugal. So again, in sharing these stories, my purpose is really that you find your own answers as to whether this country at this time or in your future is a place you want to consider. So today I'd like to talk about my accidental career. And as I've said earlier, it's all been accidental, but it's all been foretold. It's all been my destiny. First, the interview. This was my first professional interview. It was in New York. We were living in the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut metropolitan area. And I didn't want to stay there. It was just too much. The hubbub, the too many people, the too expensive, the fact that people who were established there had long careers and they were really dug in. To be able to make it, it took decades. And I was looking for success on a different clock. So I announced to my parents that sometime soon I would be moving to Dallas. I had no plan. Where I got the idea to go to Dallas, Texas, I don't know, except that maybe the Dallas show was on. I'm not even sure if that was on at that time. But there was the appealing nature of Dallas, of course, is that it's kind of a place for renegades. It's kind of a place for people that want to go against the grain and find their own way. And I would describe myself always as a pioneer, if you will. So the interview, my first professional interview, it was in New York City, and it was with a nonprofit organization. Actually, not an organization, but rather an institution. It was over 120 years old at that point. So it was a very corporate setting, and New York City, you would expect that. But it was filled with interesting characters, doing interesting work. Up until this point, my exposure to working in the nonprofit world was zero. I'd never considered it as a career path. I didn't even know it existed. And at that time, the industry was just really beginning to be recognized as a major part of the economy in the United States and even globally. So my interview was really my exposure to that. My interview was really understanding the nature of the opportunity that presented itself to me. And backing up a little further, so I studied radio, television, communications briefly in college. My college career at that time was less than stellar, although I had a great affection for radio, television, but probably I was influenced by a dear friend of mine who actually was running camera for KSL, which is the ABC affiliate in Salt Lake City. He was working his fingers to the bone. He didn't get anywhere over the span of several years. It's not that I'm adverse to hard work, and I can demonstrate that throughout my career. I just had urgency about achieving success, momentum, the opportunity to be a leader in whatever sector I ended up in. So I had spent Sundays with the tiny little New York Times ads, which at that time were about the best resource for finding a job, especially an entry-level job, because they were difficult to identify. This was pre-internet hiring. It was the dark ages, if you will. So, and that came through in a number of ways, which I'll share with you. So the interview, I fell in love. I thought, oh, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I remember going home and telling my mother all about it, and she was like, what do you mean? What do you mean you're going to raise money for an institution that focuses on immunology and respiratory medicine that was founded by Roman Catholic nuns because people were moving to Denver, where the actual facility was, and they were literally dying in the streets at that time, years and years and years and years and years ago, because of tuberculosis. They went there for the climate. Doctors believed that the Rocky Mountains, the elevation, the dry climate were beneficial, and they were literally, there was no facility to care for them. So this institution was born out of that need. It was founded by Roman Catholic nuns, but it actually had Jewish in the title. All of the leadership was Jewish. The whole donor base was Jewish, and I was not. So that was another reason to go for it, because I didn't believe in barriers. And I had been exposed to many people who were Jewish. My parents' best friends were Jewish. My father worked with many people who were Jewish. So for me, it was great. I felt at home. I felt like a member. I felt like I'm not an outsider. I'm an insider. I definitely can represent this mission in all its glory, in its statement that it was non-sectarian, but its heart and soul, which were Jewish. And I'll share with you that much later on, when I was learning fundraising, because that was the thrust of the job. The one thing I learned is, so I was raised Roman Catholic. I am a Roman Catholic. Roman Catholics in the United States raise money through bake sales and raffles and having fairs with rides, which were great fun. But, you know, this is really a way to raise money that's grassroots and very intensive and probably not the easiest way, although you're engaging the community. So that's another whole value that's being delivered and achieved through this kind of fundraising. So I would never advocate for one kind of building resources, because it all has a purpose and it's all important. But I came with that perspective, and whoa, did I learn quickly that in the Jewish faith, the culture is one of intergenerational philanthropy. So you give and you support, and then your children give and they support, and it's passed down from generation to generation. So as a person learning fundraising, the key is learning how to connect with people, learning how to connect with them on such an emotional level, as well as a practical level, as well as a success level. The institution or the organization has to deliver value for their support. But if you're connecting on that, it's almost connecting on a soul level. If you're connecting on that level to the goals of the institution, then you're building a lifelong, multi-generational relationship. Unbelievable, the power in that. Unbelievable, the level of philanthropy that people who are involved and engaged at that level then demonstrate throughout the lifetime of their relationship with the institution. This is all to say to you, I was hooked. I went home, talked to my parents. They were mystified. I remember going out to dinner with some of their Jewish friends, actually, and they were saying, What? Why are you going to do that? What do you want to do that for? But I just knew. I knew it was my calling. I knew what I was attracted to, I think, also was the fact that it wasn't about selling widgets or, anything that anybody could do, a robot could do, and at that time robots were just a pipe dream, but that anybody could do. I wanted to do something that was, of course, unique, as most young people do. So I waited and hoped that I got the offer, that I got called in for another interview, that I was made an offer. But before that happened, immediately, the day that I went home and talked with my parents about it, and I was living at home at the time, I said, love it, want to do it. And then I took out my checkbook and I wrote a check for $15 and I sent it off with a thank you note. Actually, I don't think I even thanked it. I sent it to the headquarters. So time passed. And in the interview, they had asked the following question: where do you want to work? We have 6 regional offices around the country. We're hiring in all of them. Where do you want to work? And I knew I didn't want to stay in the New York metropolitan area, just for all the reasons I just mentioned. And again, getting back to my announcement, sometime shortly before that I'm going to move to Dallas someday. I'm going to move to Dallas soon, actually. Dallas was one of them. It was Dallas, Denver, Detroit, Los Angeles, Chicago, or New York. And I pretty much listed them in that order, that was where I wanted to go. So along comes the response. And the response is, we don't need any women in those locations, so thanks, but no thanks. I was pretty heartbroken. So, but then time passed, and I was focused on the other little tiny ads in the Sunday New York Times, and I decided, okay, I need to move on. But it opened up my search. I started looking for opportunities like this. And then they called. And they said, would you come into New York for an interview? This is for a job in New York. Okay, I went in. I was ready. It's like, okay, if it has to be New York, if that's my way in the door, I'm there. So I went in and I met with the regional director. The regional director, whose name was Herb. Herb had been there and been part of the institution for many years, many decades actually, and he had been very successful in engaging the corporate sector in New York and in individual donors and individuals. And I really liked Herb. He was older, he was kind, but the strangest thing, and this is another example of the dark ages that I was operating in, he looked not at my eyes. He looked elsewhere the entire interview. So I said to myself, well, I guess you have to use what you've got, right? I didn't use it, but I mean, it was there, so what am I going to do? It's just one of the things at the time that women had to put up with, had to make the best of, had to get past. It was a little disturbing, but at that time we had no power to change anything, except maybe from within. And that's what I thought. If I'm able to join this organization, somehow I can help her see my eyes. Herb was great. He was a great teacher. Anyway, long story short, I got the job, and I started out and people started to make jokes that I actually bribed my way. I bribed my way into my first professional gig. I bribed my way into my career. $15 is all it took. And I was off and my career began. So let me tell you about the crew. I told you before that when I walked in for the first interview, I interviewed with a gentleman whose name is Bert. And Bert was tall and sort of a typical New Yorker, very eccentric. And you could tell he was eccentric, but enthusiastic and straightforward. If you know anything about New Yorkers, you know that they're pretty direct. They come off as perhaps rude, but they're, in my opinion, anything but. They are some of the kindest, most caring people that I've ever known in my life. And I'll share some dark stuff later on, things that happened to me, and in particular share that because it demonstrates just what I'm talking about. So the crew consisted of Bert, who was the boss, and Bert taught me how to make cold calls on the phone, because we didn't have email or anything like that. Cold calls on the phone. This was really scary stuff, really scary. To just tell you about myself growing up, I was shy. I am shy. Naturally, I'm shy. And so getting on the phone with someone I didn't know and asking them for something, and in this case, it was asking for a meeting. And the place we were actually going into a community, setting up appointments to meet with people, to ask them to become engaged in a very simple way, to ask them to help us connect with their sphere of influence, the people in their lives, to help expose the institution to them, the mission of the institution, and ultimately to raise money and help them become involved. So there was Herb, actually it's not Herb, there was Herb as the director. He didn't travel with the crew. There was Bert, my boss, the boss of the crew. And then there was, I'm trying to think, sorry. Don, who was an academic. Why he was doing this work, I don't know, except he didn't want to work that hard. He didn't want a career to consume his life. And so much later on, and I'll share it with you, much later on I met someone whose saying used to be, work is what you do on the way to the theater, on the way home from the theater, or on the way to the theater, on the way to the theater. And so that was kind of Don's attitude. And I came from a very, very hard-charging father and a mother who had achieved college credentials at a time when women did not, and had had a career in a male-dominated field, which is science, chemistry to be specific, which is just astonishing because at the time she was doing that, there were zero women. So I come from that background, that kind of stock, which is go, and work hard. And so for me, this was kind of illuminating that there would be another way you could approach paying your bills, living, and maybe enjoying life a little bit more, not just putting it off for someday. Someday I'll enjoy my life. Someday I'll have time for my family. Someday I'll go on vacation, which is kind of like, that's kind of how my home life was. And then there was a guy from Wall Street, Larry. And Larry was silver spoon, from a pedigreed family, and didn't think he had to work. He had the job, I think because he saw it as a rung in the ladder of his ultimately succeeding Herb or others like him. So he never did much. So that was the crew, and the first destination, the first community that we went to was Detroit. And Detroit at the time was really beginning to have a major renaissance. So the first night in Detroit, we made calls, we visited with people. I passed all the bars that had been set for me about, how to get through that. I was moderately successful. I started to feel comfortable. But the first night, we actually went to some bar in Southfield, Michigan that served green beer. It was St. Patrick's Day. So here I am there with my Jewish colleagues, two of them gay, and I had not been exposed to gay people directly in my sphere before. It was just fabulous. It was a learning experience from the get-go. Much later, I would say a year and a half later, I had the opportunity to actually lead on a corporate event in Detroit. And what I mean by corporate event are the big testimonial dinners, right? So they engage the corporate sector. And I'm a sponge when I'm around people and learning new things. And so I had been luckily mentored by people who gave me the key, and I was listening, so I got it. And one of the keys was to the corporate events. And no one really articulated this, so it was pieces that I pulled together. It was that you get the guy in town that nobody can afford to say no to as the chairman of your event. And then you engage the entire business community that way. And so through that one night event, you of course seek support, but you also expose a whole group of community leaders to an institution that's doing phenomenal work. And I should tell you that this institution, while based in Denver, was taking patients from 60 countries and every state. It had trained doctors, postdocs, researchers, as well as medical professionals in dealing with the tough cases of asthma, allergies. I mean, we're talking about life-threatening, actually life-taking in multiple instances, respiratory illnesses, as well as the companion study of immunology, what helps solve those issues, what helps prevent them, what helps treat them. And so it had a legitimate reason to stand before this community and make its case for support. Well, because I think I was mentored well, and maybe because I was listening a little bit, what happened was I was hugely successful. And during this time, Lee Iacocca had hit the ground running with the Mustang, and he'd taken over Chrysler at a time when Chrysler was in crisis, was about to go belly up. The price of oil suddenly increased several fold. There was the Arab embargo, the shutdown of OPEC, whatever it was at the time. And that's when the federal government first stepped in and bailed out Chrysler. That was the first time of only 2 times, I think, that the federal United States government has bailed out any member of the auto industry. But despite that, I had learned well, and I had gone after the guy, and I got him. And therefore, my event rocked and rolled. I actually raised more money than anybody in their wildest dreams thought. In fact, I raised so much money that I was sort of approached by the Association of Local Nonprofit Organizations and Institutions, who basically said to me, "You don't live here. You go away and you come back every 2 years or longer, okay?" To which I said, okay, and hoped that I could sell it upstream. We did that for a while, but the reception in the community was so terrific that we were able to have an annual event there with great ongoing success. So that in a nutshell was how my career began. Just to tell you, the RenCen, the Renaissance Center, which is now the world headquarters for General Motors, that actually was opening up at the time I was rolling out my corporate campaign. There was so much energy in Detroit. It was so positive. I actually love Detroit. I actually have such a fondness for that community. Many years later, strangely, right? There are no mistakes, it's all my destiny. Many years later, I'm offered a position at Henry Ford Health System, which is a regional healthcare provider and research institution in Southeast Michigan, and able to go back to Southeast Michigan. My husband and I landed in Detroit. We stayed in Detroit. We love Detroit, and I wanted to make a contribution to the community. I wanted to maybe become a part of leadership. I wanted to maybe run for something. Things changed, and we'll talk about that, and that didn't happen. But I just wanted to share with you today my first foray into non-government work. And it all ends up pointing toward today living in Portugal. And wherever you are in your career, whether you're pondering retirement or whether you're early on, I believe that you should consider this country as an option if you are considering moving from the West, moving from a more, moving from anywhere really, but I'm thinking more about Canada, the USA, Australia, the UK. There are a good amount of programs that cater to digital nomads as well as retired people here in this country. And so I think it's worth consideration. It's worth examining whether this is your future, this is in your future. And so I thank you for listening today. I hope you'll come back again soon. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, and I look forward to talking with you again. Thank you so much.